"Look at Barbie," the voice sneered, dripping with condescension. "You sure you got off at the right stop, sweetheart? The cheerleading camp is about 50 miles that way. They called her weak in training. They laughed. They underestimated her, pushing her to her breaking point. But what they saw as weakness was simply a coiled spring." In just 2008 seconds, the world watched in stunned silence as Lena Alvarez, a name now whispered with reverence across the barracks, didn't just fight for survival, but for respect. This is the story of how she knocked out 5 Marines. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe to Veteran Biker for more incredible stories. Lena Alvarez stepped off the bus at Camp Wellington, the scorching California sun beating down on her regulation uniform. A black belt, a symbol of years of relentless dedication and silent mastery, lay hidden beneath the fabric. But more importantly, a chip on her shoulder the size of Texas pressed against her spirit. The landscape before her was a stark, intimidating tableau of concrete barracks and sprawling training facilities, a concrete jungle that would be her crucible for the next 12 weeks. Each distant shout, each barked command carried on the dry air, painting a vivid picture of the relentless demands that lay ahead. She adjusted the heavy duffel bag on her shoulder, its weight a familiar discomfort, and scanned the faces of her fellow recruits, a sea of mostly young men, their expressions a mix of nervous anticipation and forced bravado. From the moment her boots hit the asphalt, the stares began. They were not subtle glances of curiosity, but pointed, heavy gazes, laden with judgment and thinly veiled skepticism. Lena was one of only 3 women in Delta Company, a fact that seemed to amplify every whisper, every knowing nod among the male recruits. The message was clear, etched into the very atmosphere of Camp Wellington. She was an anomaly, an outsider, and undeniably a target. Well, what do we have here? The voice cut through the murmur of arrivals, thick with a self-assured drawl that commanded attention. It belonged to Corporal Boone, a colossal figure of a man, easily 220 pounds of solid muscle. His neck, thicker than most people's thighs, was a testament to years spent dominating football fields in Alabama. He moved with a swagger, a predatory confidence that seemed to announce his arrival before he even spoke. 4 other Marines trailed behind him, a pack of hyenas following their alpha. Their movements synchronized, their expressions reflecting their leader's arrogant smirk. Ruiz was a walking brick wall, his arms a canvas of intricate tattoos that whispered tales of street brawls and hard-won victories in the unforgiving back alleys of East LA. His eyes held a dormant intensity, the kind that promised swift, unyielding force. Vela, pale and wiry, possessed a chilling stillness, his calculating eyes betraying a quiet enjoyment in the suffering of others. There was a cold, intellectual cruelty to his gaze that made him perhaps the most unsettling of the group. Fowler carried himself with the cocky swagger of a former high school wrestling champion, a man perpetually reliving past glories, seemingly oblivious to the fact that his glory days were far behind him. His movements were fluid, aggressive, a constant reminder of his physical prowess. Brooks, the quietest of the pack, seemed content to let the others do the talking, his eyes constantly observing, assessing, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. He was the shadow, the strategist in the making, the silent force in their collective menace. Boone circled Lena like a predator sizing up its prey, his southern drawl dripping with condescension. "Look at Barbie," he sneered, his words intended to wound, to diminish. "You sure you got off at the right stop, sweetheart? The cheerleading camp is about 50 miles that way." His crew erupted in a chorus of boisterous laughter, the sound echoing across the training ground, drawing the eager attention of other recruits. They too were hungry for any distraction, any spectacle that would alleviate their own gnawing nervousness on this first intimidating day. Lena kept her expression neutral, a skill honed over years of rigorous martial arts training. In the dojo, emotional control was paramount, as vital as physical technique. Since the tender age of 7, she had immersed herself in karate, jiu-jitsu and kickboxing, disciplines instilled in her by her father. A former army ranger, he had recognized the harsh realities of a world that would constantly underestimate his daughter because of her size and gender. He had taught her not just to defend herself, but to master her emotions, to become an unreadable force. Revealing her extensive background now, however, would only paint a larger, more tempting target on her back. Instead, she offered a polite, almost imperceptible nod, and continued her determined walk towards the barracks, her every step measured, controlled. "Hey, I'm talking to you!" Boone's voice rose, his irritation evident as he quickened his pace, stepping directly into her path. His massive frame blocked her way completely, casting a long shadow over her. "Didn't your mama teach you manners? When a superior addresses you, you respond." Lena stopped, meeting his gaze without a flicker of fear or hesitation. Her voice was calm, steady, cutting through the tense air. "You're not my superior," she replied, her words delivered with quiet conviction. "We're all recruits here." The comment hit Boone like a physical slap across the face. His jaw tightened, a vein pulsed visibly in his neck, and Lena could almost see the furious gears turning in his head. He was filing away this moment of defiance, cataloging it for future retribution. She had just made an enemy, a formidable one, but in that same instant she had also established an undeniable truth. She would not be an easy victim. She would not bend. She would not break. Within hours of settling into the barracks, the psychological warfare began in earnest. The initial taunts were just the opening salvo. During their first combat drill, Boone and his crew positioned themselves strategically around Lena, orchestrating a series of accidental body checks during formation runs. Each time she stumbled but miraculously recovered, never quite losing her footing, Ruiz would mutter just loud enough for others to hear, "Careful there, princess. Wouldn't want you to break a nail." These comments elicited snickers from some of the other recruits, those who sought to align themselves with Boone's burgeoning power. Others looked visibly uncomfortable, their gazes darting away, but none dared to speak up, unwilling to draw Boone's ire onto themselves. The harassment escalated during meal times, becoming more insidious, more designed to publicly humiliate. Vela, with his cold, calculating eyes, would accidentally bump into Lena as she carried her tray, sending food scattering across the mess hall floor. The chaotic splatter of lukewarm slop was designed to draw attention, to make her the center of a humiliating spectacle. When she bent down, meticulously, quietly, to clean it up, Fowler would make crude, lewd comments about her position, his words designed to ignite a searing flush of humiliation and rage across her face. Lena felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but she bit back any retort, her focus unwavering on the task of maintaining her composure, of not giving them the satisfaction of a reaction. Meanwhile, Brooks, the quiet observer, took to stealing small, seemingly insignificant items from her footlocker. A bar of soap, a pair of socks, a fresh towel. These petty thefts, while minor in isolation, forced her to constantly replace basic necessities, adding a layer of insidious frustration to her already demanding routine. It was a subtle, persistent erosion of her sense of security, a constant reminder that she was being watched, targeted, and undermined, even in the sanctity of her personal space. But it was during hand-to-hand combat training that Boone's true, more elaborate strategy revealed itself. With a practiced show of fake concern, he approached drill instructor Sergeant Hunt. "Sergeant Hunt," Boone stated, his voice modulated to convey appropriate gravitas. "I've been watching Alvarez during our training sessions, and I'm worried she's falling behind the male recruits. She really needs extra attention." This assertion wasn't entirely false. Lena was deliberately holding back her true abilities, performing just well enough to avoid direct reprimand, but never showcasing her extensive martial arts background. She didn't want to reveal her full hand until she had completely understood the complex dynamics at play, the unspoken hierarchies, and the true motivations of her tormentors. Her father had taught her that sometimes the most effective strategy was to allow your enemies to underestimate you, to let them grow complacent, while you diligently gathered intelligence, mapping out their weaknesses, their patterns, their predictable responses. Alvarez needs work on her basic defensive positions, Boone continued, his concern feigned but utterly convincing. Maybe some of us more experienced guys could help her out after hours. Give her some extra one-on-one instruction, really bring her up to speed. Sergeant Hunt, a grizzled veteran whose weathered face seemed to embody decades of military service, appeared to view the integration of women into combat roles as a necessary evil rather than a sign of progress. He readily agreed to these mentoring sessions, believing them to be a beneficial, if somewhat unofficial, way to ensure all recruits met the demanding standards. What followed were brutal, soul-crushing after-hours training sessions. Under the guise of instruction, Boone and his crew would take turns overpowering Lena. They would pin her to the mat repeatedly, their combined weight a crushing force, making comments designed to break her spirit. Real combat is different, Alvarez. Enemies won't go easy on you because you're a woman. Out here, your gender means nothing. It's about strength, raw power. Each session ended with Boone's favorite, venomous refrain, delivered with a smug, self-satisfied grin. Maybe you should consider transferring to a desk job, Alvarez. This isn't the place for someone like you. Lena endured it all with gritted teeth, her body aching, her spirit burning with a controlled fury. With every forced submission, every cutting remark, she was not just enduring, she was learning. She memorized every move they made, every tell, every subtle shift that betrayed a weakness. She observed how Ruiz favored his right side, a telltale sign of an old shoulder injury he unconsciously protected. Thompson consistently telegraphed his punches with a slight dip of his shoulder, a predictable precursor to his attacks. Fowler relied too heavily on his wrestling background, making him predictably vulnerable in close-quarters combat, his moves becoming rote and easily anticipated. Brooks, while fast and elusive, displayed poor balance when subjected to sudden pressure, a key vulnerability in dynamic exchanges. And Boone. Boone was all brute force, a relentless, unthinking juggernaut with no finesse, no subtlety. He was the kind of fighter who had never faced anyone who could match his aggression with superior technique, who could turn his own momentum against him. He was a hammer, and she was learning to be the anvil, ready to reshape him. As the weeks passed, Lena realized that Boone wasn't merely trying to break her spirit. He was building towards something far bigger, far more public and definitive. The way he orchestrated the harassment, the careful, almost artistic escalation of humiliation, the deliberate gathering of witnesses during their training sessions, it was all a meticulously planned prelude. He was setting the stage for a grand finale, a public spectacle designed to either force her to quit in shame or to break her so completely that she would never recover, her reputation shattered, her spirit extinguished. What Boone didn't know, couldn't possibly fathom, was that Lena had been preparing for this exact moment her entire life. And when it finally came, she would not just be ready, she would be unleashed. The training facility buzzed with a brittle, nervous energy, a palpable tension that hung heavy in the air. Week 4's stress test had arrived, a brutal sparring session meticulously designed to shatter the weak-willed and forge the survivors into true Marines. Lena had known this moment was coming, and almost primal dread had coiled in her gut for weeks, a silent alarm bell chiming in rhythm with Boone's escalating aggression. She understood, with chilling clarity, that he and his crew had been meticulously building towards something explosive, something designed not just to test, but to humiliate and break. Drill Instructor Sergeant Hunt, his weathered face a mask of grim anticipation, surveyed the assembled recruits. His voice a gravelly roar that seemed to vibrate through the very concrete beneath their feet, cut through the anxious murmurs. "Today," he barked, his eyes sweeping over them like a hawk assessing potential prey, "we separate the warriors from the wannabes. Full-contact combat scenarios designed to simulate the chaos of real warfare. You'll be tested under pressure, pushed beyond your limits, and some of you will discover you don't have what it takes to wear the uniform." His words hung in the air, a prophecy of pain and revelation. Across the training mat, Boone's eyes locked onto Lena's. He smiled, but it wasn't the friendly, reassuring grin of a fellow Marine. It was the predatory smirk of a man whose meticulous planning was finally coming to fruition. For days he'd been subtly working on Sergeant Hunt, planting seeds of doubt about Lena's supposed deficiencies, whispering concerns about her readiness for combat. He'd suggested, with a practiced air of professional concern, that she desperately needed a reality check before she got herself or others killed in actual combat. He'd built a narrative of her inadequacy, carefully constructing the justification for what he was about to unleash. "Sergeant Hunt!" Boone called out, his voice carrying just the right note of feigned worry, loud enough for many to hear. "I've been watching Alvarez closely during our training sessions, and I'm genuinely concerned she's not ready for this level of intensity. Maybe some of us more experienced recruits could give her a demonstration first. Show her what real combat truly looks like." Sergeant Hunt considered this for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he studied Lena. She could see the internal struggle in his expression. The unspoken political pressure to ensure female recruits succeeded warred with his genuine, deeply ingrained belief that coddling anyone would inevitably lead to Marines dying in the field. He valued toughness, resilience, and an uncompromising ability to perform under pressure above all else. "You think she needs remedial instruction, Boone?" Hunt's voice was gruff, devoid of emotion. "Just want to make sure she's prepared, Sergeant," Boone replied, his tone earnest, almost deferential. "Combat isn't a place for hesitation or weakness." Sarah could see the glint of anticipation in his eyes, a flicker of triumph that belied his carefully constructed facade of concern. "Fine," Sergeant Hunt finally conceded, his decision sealing Lena's fate. "Boone, Ruiz, Vela, Fowler, Brooks, you five will demonstrate proper combat techniques on Alvarez. Show her what she faces in the real world." He stepped back, crossing his arms, a silent observer. The other recruits, a loose circle now forming around the designated combat area, pressed closer. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, overwhelming realization the trap had finally sprung. This wasn't training. This was a public execution, meticulously designed to humiliate her into quitting, to break her utterly and publicly. The circle of recruits tightened, some looking deeply uncomfortable, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and fear, but utterly unwilling to speak up. Others, however, leaned forward, eager for the spectacle about to unfold, their eyes alight with a morbid curiosity. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, crude bets being placed on how long she would last before completely breaking down, before tears or screams replaced her stoic silence. Boone stepped into the center of the mat, cracking his knuckles with theatrical flourish, the sound sharp in the hushed facility. "Don't worry, Princess," he taunted, his grin wide and cruel. "We'll go easy on you at first, help you understand what you're really up against." His crew spread out around her in a loose, practiced formation, effectively cutting off any potential escape routes. Ruiz flexed his massive shoulders, the intricate tattoos on his arms seeming to writhe in the stark fluorescent lighting, muscles rippling under his skin. Vela bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, like a seasoned boxer warming up for a championship fight, his eyes cold and calculating. Fowler dropped into a low, predatory wrestler's crouch, his gaze locked onto Lena's legs, anticipating his moment. Brooks, true to his nature, hung back slightly, observing, content to let the others initiate the first brutal moves while he waited for his opportune moment to join the fray. "The thing about real combat," Boone continued, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent training facility, reverberating with false wisdom, "is that your enemies won't care that you're a woman. They won't pull their punches or worry about hurting your feelings. So we're going to show you what that feels like." The first shove came without warning. Boone's massive hand connected with Lena's shoulder with brute force, sending her stumbling backward, directly into Ruiz's waiting arms. The impact drove the air from her lungs with a sharp gasp, and Ruiz's thick forearms instantly wrapped around her torso, pinning her arms tightly to her sides, rendering her momentarily helpless. "See how easy that was?" Boone taunted, circling them like a shark, his voice laced with triumph. "In real combat you'd already be dead, but we're feeling generous today, so we'll give you another chance." Ruiz released her with a contemptuous shove that sent her sprawling across the mat, the rough surface scraping against her uniform. Lena, a lifetime of training kicking in instinctively, rolled with the impact, coming up in a defensive crouch, her movements fluid and controlled. But she forced herself to look shaken, to play the part of the overwhelmed, struggling recruit they so desperately expected her to be. She needed them to believe she was broken. She needed them to underestimate her just a little bit more. "Get up!" Vela sneered, moving in from her left side, his voice a low growl. "We're just getting started." The second assault was more coordinated, a vicious ballet of calculated aggression. Fowler shot in low, wrapping his powerful arms around her legs in a textbook wrestling takedown, his form perfect. Simultaneously, Vela grabbed her from behind, his grip like iron. Lena found herself sandwiched between them, their combined weight driving her inexorably toward the mat. Boone's cruel, echoing laughter filled the facility, a symphony of his perceived victory. "This is what happens when you're not strong enough," Boone called out to the watching recruits, his voice rising, designed to instruct, to intimidate, "when you're too weak to handle the pressure." Alvarez here thought she could just waltz in and play soldier, but reality has a way of setting people straight. They allowed her to struggle for a moment, savoring the spectacle of her apparent helplessness, before releasing her again with another contemptuous shove. Lena's lip was bleeding now, a thin, crimson line where Vela's elbow had caught her during the takedown. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, a familiar taste that, instead of signaling defeat, ignited something primal, something ancient and powerful deep within her chest. "Had enough yet?" Boone asked, his voice dripping with false concern, a theatrical performance for the silent audience. "No shame in admitting you're not cut out for this. Plenty of other jobs in the military that would suit someone with your limitations." Lena wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand, her mind racing. 15 years of martial arts training flashed through her consciousness, every grueling technique her father had drilled into her, every punishing, sparring session where she'd faced opponents twice her size, every moment of discipline, control, and unwavering focus. It all crystallized into perfect clarity. She had gathered enough intelligence. She had learned their tells, their weaknesses, their predictable patterns. Her father's voice, a steady whisper in her mind, reminded her, "Let them underestimate you. Let them believe they have won. Then, when the moment is right, unleash." "One more demonstration," Boone announced to the crowd, his confidence reaching its arrogant peak. He was blinded by his own hubris, convinced of his inevitable victory. "Brooks, Vela, hold her steady. Ruiz, Fowler, let's show everyone what happens when you're not strong enough to defend yourself." As Vela moved in from behind and Brooks approached from the right, Lena made a decision. A quiet, resolute decision that would change everything. The red cord bracelet, a simple braided memento from her father, a silent promise of strength and resilience, slipped from her wrist. It landed softly on the mat, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound lost in the collective held breath of the onlookers. It was not a sign of surrender, but of release. She stopped playing the victim. She stopped hiding her abilities. And in that precise instant, 15 years of carefully honed skill, discipline, and controlled power rose to the surface. Like a tsunami building strength in the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean, ready to crash down with unstoppable force. The transformation was so sudden, so complete, so terrifyingly abrupt that for a split second, even Boone didn't fully grasp what was happening. Lena's posture shifted from defensive to predatory. Her breathing steadied, becoming deep and even. And her eyes took on the focused intensity of a true martial artist preparing to strike, an almost feral glint of lethal intent. "Time to learn your place, princess," Boone said, winding up for what he intended to be the final devastating blow, the one that would shatter her spirit completely. But as his fist began its arc toward her face, Lena smiled. It was a cold, calculating expression, utterly devoid of fear, an ancient, knowing look that made Boone's blood run cold. In that instant, a terrifying realization dawned on him. This wasn't the helpless recruit he'd been tormenting for weeks. This was something else entirely, something far more dangerous, and she was about to show him exactly what that meant. Lena Alvarez's transformation was instantaneous, terrifying, and utterly complete. A ripple, almost an electric current, seemed to surge through her body, an unseen force manifesting in controlled, devastating violence that left the entire training facility stunned into an almost sacred silence. Her father's voice, a resonant whisper from years of grueling discipline, echoed in the newfound stillness of her mind. "When you finally strike, make it count. Make it so decisive that no one will ever question your strength again." Vela was the first to fall, and he never saw it coming. His wired anticipation rendered useless against Lena's swift precision. As he reached from behind to grab her arms, a clumsy, predictable attempt at restraint, Lena twisted with fluid, almost liquid grace. Her body moved like water around his rigid form, seamlessly evading his grip. Her elbow shot backward with the precise, piston-like force her father had meticulously drilled into her for over a decade, connecting with Vela's solar plexus. It was the exact spot, a pinpoint vulnerable nexus her father had always emphasized, that would instantly incapacitate any opponent, regardless of their size or brute strength. The impact drove every molecule of air from Vela's lungs with an audible whoosh, a guttural expulsion of breath that resonated eerily in the sudden quiet. He collapsed to the mat like a marionette whose strings had been abruptly severed, his face turning an alarming shade of purple as he gasped desperately, frantically for breath, eyes wide with shock and the terror of suffocation. Boone's attack was already in motion, a charging locomotive of 220 pounds of raw muscle and unbridled momentum behind a punch that could have shattered concrete. But Lena had been watching him for weeks, studying his every movement, every unconscious tell, memorizing the almost imperceptible dip of his shoulder that preceded every one of his massive, wind-up swings. She ducked under the blow with mere millimeters to spare, feeling the displaced air, the sheer force of his fist, ruffle her hair as it passed harmlessly overhead, a silent testament to her anticipatory mastery. What happened next defied every physical law Boone thought he knew about combat, about momentum, about the sheer impossibility of what Lena was capable of. Lena's legs swept out in a perfect blurring arc, a move practiced thousands of times until it became second nature. They connected with both of Boone's ankles simultaneously, a precise, calculated strike that completely lifted his feet off the ground. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, all 220 pounds of him hung suspended in the air, a tableau of shock and disbelief frozen on his face. Then, gravity reasserted itself with devastating, unyielding finality. Boone hit the mat with a thunderous crash that shook the entire facility, a sound that reverberated through the very bones of the stunned recruits. The impact was so violent, so utterly unexpected, that several recruits in the front row instinctively recoiled, taking a stunned step backward. Sergeant Hunt's coffee mug, forgotten in his nerveless fingers, slipped from his grasp and shattered on the concrete floor, its shards scattering like shrapnel, a stark counterpoint to the absolute silence that had descended. Boone's head bounced once against the padded surface, a sickening thud, his eyes rolling back as consciousness swiftly fled his battered body. A thin line of drool escaped from the corner of his mouth, a pathetic sign of his utter incapacitation. Ruiz charged from the left, a furious, enraged bull, his massive frame moving with surprising, almost deceptive speed for someone his immense size. But speed without technique was merely momentum, waiting to be redirected. And Lena had been redirecting momentum since she was 7 years old, turning an opponent's strength into their own undoing. She planted her left foot, pivoting with explosive force, her right leg whipping around in a spinning heel kick. It was a move her sensei had made her practice 10,000 times, a fluid, graceful, yet utterly devastating technique that had become as natural to her as breathing. The kick caught Ruiz squarely in the ribs with surgical precision, right where Lena had observed him favoring his left side during their mentoring sessions, a subtle weakness he unconsciously protected. The sound of the impact was visceral, sickening like a baseball bat connecting with a side of beef, a wet, meaty thud that made several recruits wince in sympathetic, imagined pain. Ruiz's forward momentum, propelled by his own charge, carried him 3 more steps, a bewildered, staggering motion before his brain finally registered the full, agonizing impact of what had just happened. Then, with a strangled grunt, he crumpled sideways, clutching his ribs, making small, wounded animal sounds as he sank to the mat, his face contorted in agony. Fowler, the former wrestling champion, instinctively tried to use his low center of gravity and grappling expertise to his advantage. He shot in for a double-leg takedown, a textbook move that had served him exceptionally well in the comfortable confines of high school wrestling mats. But high school wrestling and real combat were not just different disciplines. They were different universes entirely, and Lena had trained in both. As Fowler committed fully to his takedown, Lena executed a perfect sprawl, seamlessly dropping her hips and extending her legs backward, using his own forward momentum against him. Simultaneously, with a lightning-fast movement, she grabbed the back of his head, locking his neck. What followed was a textbook judo throw, a perfect execution that would have swelled her father's heart with immense pride. Lena used Fowler's committed forward momentum to lift him completely off the ground, his body describing a perfect, helpless arc through the air before slamming into the mat with bone-jarring force. The throw was so clean, so technically flawless, so utterly devastating that even in his dazed, pain-riddled state, Fowler couldn't help but register a flicker of awe, a grudging appreciation for the sheer artistry of his own destruction. Brooks, the quietest and arguably the smartest of Boone's crew, had been hanging back, observing the systematic, brutal demolition of his teammates with growing horror. He had always prided himself on being the tactical thinker of the group, the cool, calculating mind who planned while others acted. But no amount of planning, no amount of foresight could have possibly prepared him for the raw, unstoppable force he was witnessing. In less than 20 seconds, Lena had dismantled 4 fully grown, aggressive Marines with the casual efficiency of someone swatting flies, their bravado and power evaporating in an instant. Vela was still gasping for air, his face slowly, agonizingly, returning to a normal color, his eyes wide and unfocused. Boone lay motionless, a thin line of drool escaping from the corner of his mouth, his consciousness utterly lost. Ruiz had curled into a fetal position, instinctively protecting his damaged ribs, whimpering softly. Fowler stared at the ceiling with the glassy-eyed, vacant expression of someone desperately trying to remember his own name. His limbs splayed awkwardly. Brooks took one look at the carnage surrounding him, at the utterly defeated figures of his erstwhile comrades, and made the smartest, most self-preserving decision of his nascent military career. His hands shot up immediately, instinctively, in the universal gesture of surrender, his palms open, his body slack. His voice, when it came, was cracking, barely a whisper, yet it carried clearly through the stunned silence of the facility. "I'm good," he choked out, his eyes wide with genuine terror and undeniable respect. "I'm really, really good." No demonstration needed here. The entire sequence had lasted precisely 28 seconds. 28 seconds to completely rewrite the power structure of Delta Company and establish a new, undeniable order that no one, absolutely no one, would ever dare challenge again. Lena stood in the absolute center of the mat, her breathing barely elevated, her uniform hardly wrinkled, despite the intense, brutal violence that had just erupted around her. The small line of dried blood from her split lip, a lingering vestige of Boone's initial aggression, stood out starkly on her chin. Otherwise, she looked exactly as she had before Boone had made the gravest mistake of his life, before he had unleashed the very storm he sought to contain. The training facility had fallen into a silence so profound, so complete, that the only sounds were Vela's labored, wheezing breathing, Ruiz's quiet, pain-filled whimpering, and the almost imperceptible hum of the air conditioning system. 50 recruits stood frozen in place, their minds reeling, struggling desperately to process the impossible, the utterly unbelievable spectacle they had just witnessed. Sergeant Hunt stood with his mouth agape, his weathered face cycling rapidly through expressions of profound shock, utter disbelief, and something that might have been, for the very first time, genuine, grudging respect. In his 30 years of military service, through countless drills, training exercises, and even real-world combat scenarios, he had never, not once, seen anything quite like what had just unfolded before his eyes. Lena slowly wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand, the same seemingly casual gesture she'd made before the fight began. But now it carried an entirely different, potent meaning. She looked around the circle of stunned faces, her gaze lingering on each recruit, her eyes holding theirs with an unnerving intensity, until they inevitably looked away, unable to meet her unwavering stare. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, almost conversational, yet it carried with astonishing clarity through the silent facility, cutting through the heavy air like a sharpened blade. "Anyone else need a demonstration?" she asked, the words hanging in the air, cold and definitive. No one answered. No one moved. No one even seemed to be breathing. The legend of Lena Alvarez had just been born, etched into the annals of Camp Wellington, written not with words, but in 28 seconds of perfect, undeniable violence that would be talked about for decades to come. And somewhere deep in the quiet recesses of her mind she could hear her father's voice, proud and approving, a silent echo, "That's my girl!" The security footage went viral within the Marine Corps network before Lena even left the medical bay, where she was being treated for her minor split lip. Corporal Jenkins, who operated the facility surveillance system, had watched the 28-second demolition 3 times in stunned, disbelieving silence. Before the overwhelming realization hit him, he was sitting on the most incredible, most shocking piece of combat footage in Marine Corps history. Within an hour, the video, meticulously copied onto a dozen different drives, was making its way through military networks faster than wildfire through dry brush, bypassing all official channels, spreading like an unstoppable force. "Holy smokes," whispered Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, as he watched the footage for the 5th time in his office at Camp Wellington's headquarters, his eyes glued to the screen, unable to tear away. "Get General Naomi Graves on the phone. She needs to see this immediately." General Naomi Graves, the base commander and the highest-ranking female officer at Camp Wellington, was in the middle of a crucial budget meeting. Her attention focused on figures and projections when her aide burst through the door, a laptop clutched tightly against his chest, his face pale with urgency. "Ma'am," he stammered, his voice breathless, "you need to see this right now. It's about one of our recruits." The general's expression, initially one of annoyance at the interruption, slowly shifted. As she watched the grainy yet incredibly clear footage, her face cycled through fascination, then outright amazement, finally settling on a look of profound, almost reverent respect. She watched Lena systematically dismantle 5 Marines with the surgical precision of a master combatant and the relentless efficiency of a perfectly calibrated machine. She rewound the footage, then replayed it, studying each technique, each perfectly executed movement that spoke not just of natural talent, but of years, decades even, of dedicated, grueling training and an almost supernatural control. "Where did this recruit learn to fight like that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a rare tremor of awe in her usually commanding tone. "That's what we're trying to find out, ma'am," her aide replied, equally bewildered. Her file shows some martial arts background, but nothing, absolutely nothing, that would indicate this level of skill, this kind of raw, devastating power. Meanwhile, in the surprisingly quiet medical bay, Lena sat calmly on an examination table. Navy Corpsman Rodriguez, no relation to the Ruiz currently nursing broken ribs in the bed across the hall, cleaned the small cut on her lip with practiced ease. The irony of the situation was not lost on Lena. She was receiving minor medical attention for a scratch, while her 5 attackers lay in various states of unconsciousness and injury across the room. "You know," the corpsman said quietly as he applied a small bandage, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration, "They've been patching up Marines for 15 years, and I've never seen anything, absolutely anything, quite like what happened out there today. Those boys are going to be feeling this for weeks, maybe months." Through the thin walls of the medical bay, Lena could hear Boone groaning as he slowly regained consciousness, his voice slurred and confused, a pathetic shadow of his former arrogance. "What? What happened? Did a truck hit me?" "No truck, Boone," came Fowler's voice, thick with pain but laced with a surprising, almost reverent, grudging respect. "Just a 5'4" reality check." The real transformation began not on the training mat, but in the hours following the incident. Word spread through the barracks like an airborne virus, growing and mutating with each retelling until Lena's 28 seconds of controlled fury had taken on mythical proportions. Recruits who had witnessed the fight firsthand found themselves surrounded by eager listeners, a captivated audience demanding to hear the story again, each detail savored, each blow recounted with a fervent awe. She moved like something out of a movie, Private Jackson told a group of wide-eyed, newly arrived recruits, his voice hushed with reverence. 1 second, Boone was about to crush her. The next, he was eating mat and seeing stars. Another, Private Chen, whispered conspiratorially, "I heard she's some kind of black belt. Multiple disciplines. Her father was special forces or something, trained her since she was a kid." The speculation continued to build, weaving itself into the very fabric of Camp Wellington's lore, until Sergeant Hunt finally called for order during evening formation. His weathered face was unreadable as he addressed the assembled recruits, but there was something different in his voice, a subtle, almost imperceptible note of respect that hadn't been there before, a grudging admiration replacing his usual gruff indifference. "What happened today in the training facility will not be discussed outside this unit," he announced, his voice firm, echoing across the parade ground. "What I will say is this, every one of you just learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions. Size, gender, appearance, none of that matters when skill and training meet determination. Alvarez demonstrated something today that I want all of you to remember. A true warrior isn't defined by how they look, but by what they can do when pushed to their limits." His words, though delivered with his characteristic stoicism, resonated with a new authority, signaling an undeniable shift in the company's internal dynamics. The true, tangible change, however, came the very next morning. As Lena sat at her usual table during chow, the mess hall, usually a cacophony of clattering trays and boisterous chatter, fell into an unnerving silence. Every single recruit watched, their eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting to see what would happen next. Boone, sporting a spectacular black eye that blossomed purplish and green across his face and moving with the slow, deliberate stiffness of an old man, approached Lena's table. His crew, those who were mobile enough to attend breakfast, a noticeably smaller, subdued group, flanked him nervously, their faces betraying their uncertainty. This could be reconciliation, or it could be round two, and they were clearly not prepared for either. Boone stopped 3 feet away from Lena's table, his hands hanging loose at his sides in a clear, unequivocal gesture of non-aggression. When he spoke, his voice, stripped of its usual bravado and southern swagger, carried across the silent mess hall with crystal clarity, a stark contrast to his usual booming arrogance. "Alvarez," he began, his southern drawl subdued, respectful, almost humble. "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. What we did to you these past weeks, that wasn't training. That was bullying, plain and simple. And yesterday you showed us what real strength looks like." Lena looked up from her breakfast, her gaze steady, studying Boone's face for any lingering sign of deception or continued hostility. What she saw instead was genuine remorse, etched into the lines around his eyes, and something she had never expected to see from him, raw, undeniable respect. "I learned more about combat effectiveness in those 30 seconds than I did in 4 years of college football and 6 weeks of Marine training," Boone continued, his voice devoid of sarcasm, filled with a newfound reverence. "You could have seriously hurt us. Hell, you could have killed us if you'd wanted to, but you showed restraint even while defending yourself. That's the mark of a true warrior." Ruiz, his torso wrapped in bandages that hinted at the extent of his injuries, stepped forward with obvious difficulty, wincing slightly with each labored movement. His voice, though still tinged with pain, carried a surprising sincerity. "We were wrong about you, Alvarez. Dead wrong. And if anyone in this company has a problem with you from now on, they'll have to go through us first." The transformation in Boone and his crew was complete, public, and astonishing. The silent mess hall watched, utterly captivated, as the company's former bullies became Lena's most unlikely yet fierce protectors. The full weight of Lena's impact, however, resonated far beyond the barracks. General Naomi Graves personally summoned Lena to her office that very afternoon. The general's office was an intimidating space, radiating authority and history. It was filled with commendations, framed photographs with presidents and foreign dignitaries, and the accumulated weight of 3 decades of distinguished military service. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and unwavering command. But when Lena entered, her posture ramrod straight, she found the general not behind her imposing desk, but hunched over her computer screen, studying the security footage with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient sacred texts. "Sit down, Alvarez," General Graves said without looking up from the screen, her voice calm, measured, yet imbued with an undeniable gravitas. "I've been watching this footage for the better part of 2 hours, and I have one question for you." Lena sat at attention, her mind racing through every possible disciplinary action, every conceivable consequence for the spectacle she had created, even if it was in self-defense. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice firm, unwavering. General Graves finally looked up, her steel-grey eyes, sharp and intelligent, meeting Lena's gaze with a laser focus that seemed to pierce through pretense and expose truth. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of something beyond mere curiosity, a flicker of deep recognition, perhaps even a hint of awe. "My father, ma'am," Lena replied, her voice clear and steady. "He's former Army Rangers. He started training me when I was 7 years old. He said the world would constantly underestimate me because of my size and gender, so I needed to be twice as good as everyone else just to be considered equal." General Graves nodded slowly, a knowing glint in her eyes. "And what did he teach you about using those skills, Alvarez?" Lena straightened even further, her father's words, instilled through countless hours of rigorous practice and philosophical discussions, coming back to her with perfect clarity, a guiding beacon in her life. "He taught me that respect isn't given based on size or gender, ma'am," she recited, her voice gaining a quiet power. "It's earned through skill, discipline, and knowing when to use your abilities. He also taught me that true strength means protecting those who can't protect themselves, not picking on those you think are weaker." General Graves leaned back in her chair, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across her face, a rare sight that softened the hard lines of her features. "Your father sounds like a very wise man, Alvarez," she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation, "and based on what I saw in that footage, he raised a hell of a Marine." The general then stood, moving away from her desk to the large window overlooking the expansive training facility. Below, new recruits, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred, were going through their paces, their movements still tentative and unrefined. "Alvarez," General Graves began, her gaze fixed on the bustling activity below, "I'm going to make you an offer." Lena's heart began to race, sensing the profound implications of the conversation, the shift in her future. "After you complete basic training, and I have no doubt you'll graduate at the top of your class, I want you to consider becoming a hand-to-hand combat instructor. We need people who can teach not just technique, but the philosophy behind it. The understanding that true strength comes from discipline, from controlled power, not from dominance or brute force." Lena felt a surge of exhilaration, a deep sense of purpose igniting within her. "Ma'am, I would be honored," she replied, her voice filled with a genuine humility and a profound sense of destiny. "Good," General Graves stated, turning back to face Lena, her eyes burning with a new vision for the Marine Corps. "Because starting tomorrow, you're going to help me rewrite our combat training protocols. What happened in that facility yesterday is going to become a teaching tool. Not just about fighting techniques, but about respect, about challenging assumptions, and about what it really means to be a Marine. The conversation, so formal just moments before, had morphed into something far more profound, a pivotal turning point not just for Lena, but for the very ethos of Camp Wellington. General Graves saw in Lena not just a formidable fighter, but a living embodiment of the values she wanted to instill in every Marine. It was a recognition that true leadership wasn't always about rank, but about impact, about inspiration, and about the quiet power of undeniable skill. Lena, for the first time in weeks, felt a lightness, a sense of belonging that transcended the initial hostility. The chip on her shoulder hadn't vanished, but it had transformed, evolving from a burden of defiance into a badge of honor, a silent testament to the power of self-worth. She was no longer just enduring. She was building, shaping, and leading the way forward. The general's vision was clear, and Lena, standing tall and resolute, was ready to become an integral part of that future. Part 5. One more fight. Off the mat, Lena's conversation with General Naomi Graves had been a watershed moment, a pivotal turning point that reshaped her understanding of her own path within the Marine Corps. The offer to become a hand-to-hand combat instructor, to help rewrite the very protocols that governed how Marines were trained, wasn't just a promotion. It was a profound validation, a recognition that her unique skills and the philosophy instilled by her father held immense value. She left the general's office with a sense of quiet triumph, the weight of being underestimated finally lifting, replaced by the exhilarating burden of a new, impactful responsibility. However, the ripple effects of such a dramatic shift, especially one involving a female recruit challenging long-held traditions, were never confined to hushed offices or private conversations. News of General Graves's intent, whether through official channels or the ever-present whispers that permeated Camp Wellington, quickly reached those who were less enthused by the prospect of change. The Marine Corps, for all its progressive aspirations, remained a deeply traditional institution, and the integration of women into combat roles, let alone leadership positions in close-quarters combat, was still met with a range of reactions, from cautious optimism to outright resistance. The new high point, the fresh conflict, came swiftly, almost inevitably. A senior training officer, Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, emerged as the most vocal and influential detractor. Barnes was a man forged in the old mold, a decorated veteran whose career had been built on a rigid adherence to established norms and a deeply ingrained belief in the traditional hierarchy of physical prowess. He was a formidable figure, respected for his combat record, but his views on gender roles in the military were unyielding and decidedly archaic. To Barnes, the idea of a female recruit, however skilled, becoming an instructor, especially in something as fundamentally masculine as hand-to-hand combat, felt like an affront to the very image of the true warrior he championed. He saw it not as progress, but as a dangerous erosion of standards, a concession to what he privately dismissed as political correctness or feminist propaganda. His opposition wasn't openly hostile in the way Boone's had been. Barnes was far too seasoned, far too astute to resort to schoolyard bullying. Instead, his resistance was subtle, bureaucratic, laced with seemingly logical arguments about maintaining combat readiness, upholding tradition, and avoiding unnecessary complications in training. He voiced his concerns in private meetings, in veiled comments during staff briefings, and in carefully worded memos that landed on General Graves's desk. He argued that promoting Lena, regardless of her impressive isolated incident, would send the wrong message to the force, suggesting that brute strength and conventional masculine dominance were somehow less important than fancy techniques. He believed it would inadvertently weaken the perception of the Marine Corps' core fighting spirit. General Graves, a shrewd leader who understood the delicate balance of power and perception within the military, was well aware of Barnes's influence and his deeply entrenched views. She knew that simply dismissing his concerns outright would only solidify his opposition and potentially create deeper fractures within her command. She needed to address his arguments head-on, and she needed Lena to be a part of that confrontation. It wasn't just about making a point, it was about laying the groundwork for a new era of training, one built on merit and adaptability, not outdated stereotypes. So, a meeting was scheduled, not in the general's grand office, but in a smaller, more austere conference room, designed for frank discussions rather than ceremonial pronouncements. Lena was summoned, her presence a quiet but powerful statement in itself. When she entered, Lieutenant Colonel Barnes was already there, seated stiffly, his expression a mixture of professional courtesy and thinly veiled disdain. General Graves sat at the head of the table, her gaze sharp, assessing both her senior officer and her promising recruit. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a different kind of pressure than the physical assaults Lena had endured, but potent nonetheless. This was a battle of wills, of ideologies, fought not with fists but with words, with presence, with conviction. Barnes, ever the strategist, began with a polite but firm declaration. He acknowledged Lena's unconventional demonstration of skill, but quickly pivoted to his concerns. He spoke of the need for instructors to command universal respect, not just through isolated acts of brilliance, but through established rank, through years of proven leadership, through the conventional pathways that had historically defined Marine combat proficiency. He subtly implied that Lena, as a young, relatively inexperienced female recruit, lacked the comprehensive background to teach. What he considered true Marine combat, the grit, the raw power, the psychological intimidation he believed was paramount. He argued that her elevation, while perhaps well-intentioned, risked being perceived as tokenism, as a move designed to satisfy external pressures rather than genuine military necessity. His words, though outwardly respectful, were a carefully constructed attack, designed to undermine Lena's credibility and the general's judgment. Lena listened patiently, her expression calm, her gaze steady. She did not interrupt, she did not bristle. Her father had taught her that the most powerful responses were often the most understated, that true conviction did not require shouting or grandstanding. She remembered his lessons on the power of silence, on allowing opponents to exhaust their arguments, to reveal their full hand before striking. She felt the subtle weight of the red cord bracelet on her left wrist, a silent reminder of the strength she carried, both seen and unseen. When Barnes finally finished, the room hung silent. General Graves turned her gaze to Lena, a silent invitation to respond. Lena took a breath, slow and deliberate. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, composed, yet resonated with an undeniable authority that surprised Barnes. She didn't launch into a defensive tirade, nor did she attempt to justify her lack of conventional experience. Instead, she cut straight to the core of Barnes's argument, challenging his premise with an elegant simplicity that disarmed him. "Lieutenant Colonel Barnes," Lena began, her voice even, "you speak of true Marine combat, of what is necessary to survive. You speak of respect earned through established pathways. I understand and respect the traditions that have forged generations of Marines." She paused, her eyes meeting his directly, without challenge but with unwavering certainty. But perhaps the definition of what is true combat and how respect is earned needs to expand. Then she delivered the pivotal question, the one that pierced through all of Barnes's carefully constructed rhetoric. "Can you," Lena asked, her voice calm but firm, "teach someone to incapacitate 5 armed, aggressive individuals in 2008 seconds without causing them permanent, life-altering injuries?" Can you teach that level of control, that precision, that efficiency under extreme pressure, without relying solely on brute force or overwhelming size? The question hung in the air, a devastatingly simple challenge that dismantled Barnes's entire argument. He stiffened, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing. He opened his mouth, then closed it, searching for a response, but finding none. He was a powerful man, a respected fighter, but his method relied on overwhelming force, on conventional takedowns and strikes. The level of controlled, almost surgical incapacitation Lena had demonstrated, the ability to neutralize threats with minimal lasting damage, was beyond his purview, beyond his training philosophy. He had never considered combat in those terms, never aimed for such precise, non-lethal, yet utterly dominant outcomes. He was accustomed to breaking opponents, not outmaneuvering them with such refined elegance. The silence stretched, becoming heavier, more suffocating, as Barnes struggled. He was caught, exposed, his arguments rendered hollow by Lena's quiet, unanswerable query. His face flushed a deep crimson, not in anger, but in the acute discomfort of intellectual defeat. He was, quite simply, speechless. General Graves, observing the scene, allowed the silence to linger for another beat, letting the full impact of Lena's words settle. Then she intervened, her voice firm, carrying the undeniable weight of her rank and her conviction. "Lieutenant Colonel Barnes," she stated, her gaze sweeping between the two, "we are not selecting instructors based on gender. We are selecting instructors based on their ability to teach others to survive, to win, and to lead in an evolving battle space. We need Marines who can adapt, who can innovate, and who understand that strength comes in many forms." Lena Alvarez demonstrated a form of combat effectiveness that goes beyond traditional measures. It is precise, it is adaptable, and most importantly, it is devastatingly effective. She continued, her voice gaining momentum, directly addressing Barnes's core argument about the true warrior. "The true warrior is not defined by their build or their gender, Barnes. They are defined by their capability, by their discipline, and by their ability to achieve the mission. And if that mission requires neutralizing multiple threats swiftly and decisively, then Miss Alvarez has proven she possesses a mastery that few can match, let alone teach." Lena remained silent throughout General Graves's affirmation, her posture unwavering. She had made her point. The general had reinforced it. There was nothing more to add. She had not raised her voice, had not resorted to aggression, yet she had won. She had defeated Barnes not through physical confrontation, but through the undeniable power of her demonstrated skill and the quiet, unwavering logic of her argument. It was a victory far more profound than any she had achieved on the mat. A testament to her father's teachings that true strength often lay in restraint, in strategic thinking, and in allowing one's actions to speak for themselves. As the meeting concluded, Lena exited the conference room, her quiet steps echoing in the hallway. She had faced another challenge, a different kind of opponent, but the outcome was the same. She had overcome, she had proven her worth, and she had paved the way for a new understanding of what it meant to be a Marine, to be a warrior in the modern era. The battle for recognition was far from over, but this skirmish, fought off the mat, had decisively shifted the tide. 6 months unfolded across Camp Wellington like the turning pages of a New Testament, each day marking Lena Alvarez's deepening imprint, not just within the Marine Corps' physical structure, but upon its very soul. General Naomi Graves's audacious proposition, once a whispered vision within the confines of her polished office, had blossomed into a robust and transformative reality. Lena, having navigated basic training with an effortless grace that solidified her legend, graduating at the absolute pinnacle of her class, a feat that, by then, surprised precisely no one who had witnessed her raw, undeniable capability, had plunged headfirst into her new profound mission. She was no longer merely a recruit, no longer a fresh face navigating a rigid system. She was Instructor Alvarez, a title that resonated with a gravitas far exceeding any conventional rank, imbued with the potent, living power of her burgeoning legend. The training facility, the very arena etched into the collective memory as the crucible where her destiny had been forged in 28 furious seconds, now served as her sanctified classroom. The stark, utilitarian space, once a theater of public humiliation, had been re-envisioned, meticulously transformed into a beacon of progressive, enlightened instruction. The sprawling digital screen that dominated the front of the room, typically reserved for abstract diagrams of combat maneuvers or intricate anatomical weak points, now served a far more compelling purpose. It replayed, almost daily, the crystal-clear security footage from that fateful, sun-drenched afternoon. It was Lena's legendary 28 seconds, presented not as a mere highlight reel of aggression, but as a living, breathing teaching tool, a visual manifesto for an entirely novel philosophy of combat. Each perfectly executed block, each precisely placed strike, each fluid transition was dissected, analyzed, and absorbed by the new cohorts, a silent masterclass in effectiveness. Standing habitually by her side, a striking testament to personal evolution, was none other than Boone, now fulfilling the role of her dedicated assistant instructor. The transformation in the once arrogant corporal was nothing short of profound, almost jarring to behold for those who remembered his initial swagger. The spectacular purplish-green black eye that had once bloomed across his face had long since faded, replaced by a permanent, deep-seated respect that shimmered in his eyes, an almost reverential glint that betrayed no trace of his former animosity. His characteristic overbearing swagger had been systematically replaced by a quiet, earnest professionalism. His once booming voice, designed to intimidate and dominate, was now modulated, a subdued, almost deferential tone whenever he addressed Lena. He had, with an astonishing and sincere commitment, become her most steadfast ally, a silent, powerful endorsement of her methods, a living monument to the power of a lesson learned the hardest, most undeniable way possible. Boone, along with Ruiz, Vela, Fowler and Brooks, all now fully recovered from their various injuries, though forever marked by the indelible memory of their public comprehensive defeat, had not simply offered perfunctory apologies. They had committed themselves, body and soul, to becoming enthusiastic proponents of Lena's new revolutionary methodology. Their collective loyalty, a bond forged not through forced submission but through absolute, irrefutable dominance, was perhaps the strongest, most authentic endorsement of Lena's pervasive effectiveness. They understood intimately and irrevocably the raw, undeniable truth of her skill, having felt its precise, devastating power firsthand. Lena now stood before wave after wave of new recruits, a constantly shifting, diverse group of young men and women. Some were wide-eyed with awe, their gazes fixed on the screen behind her, already captivated by the myth. Others, however, still clung to deeply ingrained, outdated notions of strength, their expressions hinting at skepticism or ingrained biases, but all of them, without exception, found themselves utterly captivated by her presence, drawn in by the palpable authority she exuded. Her uniform was impeccably pressed, a testament to her unwavering discipline, her posture perfect, ramrod straight, radiating an aura of quiet power. Yet it was a subtle, almost imperceptible detail that drew the eye, a small yet profoundly significant visual cue, the red cord bracelet on her left wrist. It was back, the simple braided symbol of her father's enduring legacy, The quiet, ever-present reminder of her inherent strength and unyielding resilience was no longer hidden beneath the regulation sleeve of her uniform. It was now openly displayed, a deliberate, silent declaration of who she was, a beacon of her authentic identity, visible for all to see, a testament to her journey from concealment to revelation. "The first lesson you need to learn," Lena began, her voice calm, clear, and imbued with an undeniable authority, yet utterly devoid of any trace of arrogance or self-importance, "is that strength comes in many forms. It is not singular, nor is it always visible on the surface. Some of you are physically large, some are small. Some possess raw speed, others brute force. But all of you," she asserted, her gaze sweeping across the fresh faces, a sea of eager, uncertain yet hopeful expressions, "all of you possess the inherent potential to be warriors. That potential, however, is not a given. It is unlocked if you are willing to put in the relentless work, to embrace unyielding discipline, and crucially," she emphasized, her gaze lingering on each recruit, "to show unwavering respect for your fellow Marines, regardless of their background or perceived capabilities." She paused, allowing her words to sink deep into the receptive silence, allowing the monumental weight of the 28 seconds playing silently on the screen behind her to resonate fully within their nascent understanding. The Marine Corps, at its core, does not care what you look like when you walk through those doors, she continued, her voice gaining a subtle yet profound intensity, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of her experience. "What matters, truly matters, is who you become, the transformation you undergo when you walk back out. And if you remember nothing else from my class, from this entire journey," she concluded, her voice settling into a firm, unforgettable cadence, "remember this: never judge a warrior by their size, never judge them by their gender. Judge them only by their heart, by their skill, by their discipline, and by their unwavering willingness to stand up for what's right, for what is just, and for those who cannot defend themselves." Her new combat training protocols, meticulously crafted in close collaboration with General Graves and rigorously refined through countless hours of practical application, were nothing short of revolutionary. They decisively moved beyond the outdated reliance on mere brute force and overwhelming aggression, instead focusing acutely on precision, on tactical adaptability, and on the strategic understanding of an opponent's inherent weaknesses and predictable patterns. The overarching emphasis within this new curriculum was not on overpowering an adversary through sheer strength, but on outmaneuvering them with superior technique. Not on unleashing raw, uncontrolled aggression, but on executing controlled, decisive actions that maximized efficiency and minimized unnecessary damage. Boone, once the living embodiment of unthinking brute force, had, against all odds, become an unlikely but passionate champion of this new, enlightened approach. His formidable physical power was now elegantly tempered by Lena's strategic finesse, his raw strength channeled into precise, disciplined movements. He could still demonstrate the old way, the crushing impact of a raw, untamed punch, but then Lena would fluidly step in, seamlessly showing how that very force could be effortlessly redirected. How a slight, almost imperceptible shift in balance or a precisely placed foot could instantly neutralize even the most powerful, overwhelming attack. Their partnership in the training facility was a dynamic, compelling display of complementary strengths, a living, breathing testament to the profound evolution of combat philosophy within the Marine Corps. The legend of Lena Alvarez continued to expand exponentially, its influence radiating far beyond the confines of Camp Wellington. Propelled by her quiet, unassuming authority and the undeniable, tangible results of her groundbreaking teaching methods. She was no longer simply an instructor. She had ascended to the status of an icon, a transformative figure inspiring a new generation of Marines who now fundamentally understood that true strength resided not in intimidation or dominance, but in excellence, in profound respect for oneself and one's comrades, and in the unyielding courage to stand up to bullies, regardless of how imposing or powerful they might appear. Her personal story, once a whispered secret exchanged in hushed tones, was now openly discussed, studied, and integrated as a mandatory case study in what it truly meant to embody the core ethos of the modern Marine. And somewhere in the quieter, more contemplative corners of every training facility across the sprawling expanse of Camp Wellington, new recruits, their minds buzzing with newfound understanding, would whisper the remarkable story of the woman who, in an almost unbelievable display of mastery, had knocked out 5 Marines in precisely 28 seconds. It was no longer merely a tale of extraordinary physical prowess. It had evolved into a profound parable of personal transformation, of overcoming deeply ingrained preconceived notions, and of the quiet, almost ethereal power that lay dormant within an individual until it was finally ready to be unleashed upon a world that had so carelessly underestimated it. They spoke with hushed reverence of how she did not fight because she was consumed by anger, though she certainly possessed every justifiable right to be. They spoke of how she fought not out of aggression or a desire for vengeance, but because, in that pivotal moment, she was finally ready to stop hiding who she really was, to fully embrace her authentic self. Her victory was not about retribution. It was about revelation, a powerful testament to her father's enduring wisdom that true power was encapsulated in the profound ability to control, to endure with unwavering resolve, and to strike with unparalleled precision and deliberate purpose when the critical moment unequivocally demanded it. Her visionary leadership extended far beyond the immediate confines of the training mat, permeating various aspects of military life. Perry, the lone female recruit who had, with immense personal courage, attempted to intervene during Lena's brutal demonstration, had blossomed under Lena's mentorship, finding in her not just a superior, but a fierce advocate and a deeply trusted friend. Inspired directly by Lena's unwavering courage and profound impact, Perry herself had not only excelled in her subsequent training, but had become a quiet yet powerful force for positive change within her own developing cohort, always remembering the invaluable lesson that true strength inherently included the profound willingness to stand up for others, especially those perceived as vulnerable. Lena and General Graves also continued their powerful collaboration on broader institutional initiatives, tirelessly working to create and implement groundbreaking programs designed to foster an environment of genuine meritocracy throughout the Marine Corps, where demonstrable skill and unwavering character unequivocally triumphed over archaic biases and long-held prejudices. The initial stubborn resistance from figures like Lieutenant Colonel Barnes gradually, almost imperceptibly, faded into irrelevance, not because he was actively silenced, but because the undeniable, quantifiable success of Lena's revolutionary methods spoke volumes louder than any lingering objection he could possibly muster. Results, after all, were the ultimate irrefutable arbiter within the pragmatic, outcome-driven culture of the Marine Corps. The final, most profound transformation in Lena herself was subtle yet deeply resonant. The chip on her shoulder, once a constant, bitter weight of defiance born from years of systemic underestimation, had fully, beautifully evolved into a quiet, resolute sense of unwavering purpose. She had, through her actions, unequivocally proved her intrinsic worth not just to a skeptical world, but more importantly, to herself. The red bracelet, once a concealed talisman of her hidden power, was now a proudly visible symbol of her remarkable journey. An enduring reminder that the strengths cultivated in the quiet privacy of dedicated training could indeed become transformative forces of public inspiration. She stood, a living, breathing testament to the timeless idea that the most profound and meaningful victories are not always those achieved against external, tangible foes, but often, and most significantly, those achieved against the deeply ingrained limitations, the insidious doubts, and the pervasive underestimations that society in its blindness so carelessly places upon individuals. She was no longer simply Lena Alvarez, the remarkable recruit who defied all expectations. She was Instructor Alvarez, the visionary architect of a new generation of Marines, where excellence was recognized as the only true measure, and respect was unequivocally earned through action and character, not demanded through force or tradition. Her profound impact rippled like a tidal wave through the entire institution, systematically reshaping ingrained perceptions and inspiring countless individuals who might have otherwise been tragically overlooked, dismissed, or even broken by an unforgiving system. The story of the 28 seconds evolved beyond a mere anecdote. It became a fundamental, foundational part of the Marine Corps' evolving narrative, a powerful, enduring reminder that true heroes often emerge from the most unexpected places, and that genuine, impactful leadership frequently begins with the quiet, unyielding courage to embrace and exhibit one's authentic, most powerful self. Lena's unparalleled legacy was not merely in the groundbreaking techniques she meticulously taught, but, more significantly, in the transformative mindset she tirelessly instilled, that resilience, unwavering discipline, and an unshakable self-belief could overcome literally any obstacle, and that the greatest strength lay in honoring one's true inherent potential, allowing it to shine with an unparalleled brilliance. Her extraordinary journey from being unjustly labeled weak to becoming a revered, transformative instructor was a luminous beacon, illuminating the arduous path for all who followed, unequivocally proving that the most formidable warriors, the most impactful leaders, are almost invariably those who are, at first, underestimated the most. As Lena Alvarez carved her own path, shattering expectations and forging a new understanding of true strength, her story became a powerful echo in the halls of power, a living testament to resilience. It reminds us that often the most formidable warriors are those whose quiet resolve is initially mistaken for weakness, whose discipline is deeper than any display of brute force. The legacy of the 28 seconds isn't just about a fight won. It's about a future reshaped, a paradigm shifted, proving that genuine respect is always earned through skill, integrity, and the courage to stand unyielding in the face of adversity. Here at Veteranbiker, we believe in the power of such stories, tales of strength, endurance, and the transformative journey of the human spirit. Lena's journey from being underestimated to becoming a groundbreaking instructor is a beacon, illuminating the path for anyone who feels unseen or dismissed. If this incredible narrative resonated with you, if it sparked a sense of purpose, or simply left you inspired, please show your support. Hit that like button and subscribe to Veteranbiker so you don't miss another powerful story like Lena's. Your engagement fuels our mission to bring these compelling narratives to life. What was the most impactful lesson you took from Lena's story? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We love hearing from our community. And now, for more journeys of strength and determination, check out the videos appearing on your screen. Until next time, stay strong, ride safe, and keep challenging those assumptions.